Welcome to episode 13 of Using AI. I'm Alex Den, and I'm joined once more by ML research scientist Alex Papadopoulos-Kofiatis, and we no longer have stalwart of the show, Rafie with us today, I'm afraid, because he is chatting to investors, which makes me think he hasn't really got his priorities right, Alex. I don't know how you feel about that.
I agree. I'm very disappointed.
All right, so this is going to be a news roundup, mostly around what Microsoft have just announced at their Ignite 2023 event, which is basically a Copilot for everything. It feels like the word Copilot and assistant has just become so overused and commoditized that Microsoft have just killed off even calling Bing Chat, and they've just gone, sod it, let's just call it Copilot and try and own the term Copilot. And you can have a Copilot for Azure, you can have a Copilot in your Office 365 tools, you can have a Copilot in like everything, like Microsoft Dynamics 365, Copilot Studio, there's like all sorts of things. And they've tried to be like customers like Visa and BP and Honda and Pfizer and partners like Accenture and EY and PwC are all using Copilot, which is kind of a way of saying we gave a chatbot and installed it on the side of all of our users' enterprise documents. And they make it sound a lot more impressive than I think it actually is. But it is interesting that they have rolled this out because, I mean, when Microsoft 365 implements something, it kind of becomes ubiquitous. So, yeah, I mean, they're obviously, I think they're trying to like tackle, I reckon they're in cahoots, right, with the OpenAI, who want to use GPT-4 and Code Interpreter to dethrone GitHub Copilot. So they're just completely muddying the brand waters of Copilot so that it's harder for people to find GitHub Copilot. Silly theory on branding there, but yeah, Microsoft
Alex,
is trying to
Copilot,
own Copilot.
GitHub Copilot is also trained based on GPT models, right? So it's GPT fine-tuned. But yeah, you're right that everything now is a Copilot. It feels like in the next Microsoft conference.
I need to correct myself as well because I'm being a complete numpty, which is a very English word. But of course, GitHub is owned by Microsoft. So
correct, yeah.
Maybe they just see Copilot as their most successful brand, and they're now diffusing that brand name across
to
their
everything.
Entire product. Yeah, they even got a quote from their like comms head on why they're calling it Copilot and retiring the words Bing Chat, which was basically a GPT-4 wrapper.
It feels like in the next Microsoft conference, they should get Steve Ballmer to come out and shout, Copilot, 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 with the developers. It was Steve Ballmer, right? Am I misremembering?
Yeah, it was Steve Ballmer. I think he actually did very well. He's got a bad rep, but I think he did a good job with what he could. I mean, Microsoft is now one of the most valuable companies in the world, right? And there was a point where people thought it was all going downhill. So, I mean, we are not a Microsoft company. We're sort of Google this and Slack and various things that are not Microsoft based. So we haven't personally had Copilot integrated into various things that we do, but you do use GitHub Copilot, and you find that best in
GitHub Copilot. Correct. That's the only thing that I've used with a Copilot in its name, I think. I'm curious to use the different Windows and Microsoft Copilots, but I haven't yet. Although I tend to agree, Alex, that it is probably kind of the same thing, just pasted on the side of every Microsoft product. I assume some will have deeper integrations as well, so something more useful than just the chatbot plus data, which has become now ubiquitous, I guess. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, definitely. They they've tried to give some specific examples of how people have rated it, which I suppose is what they wanted to do, right? What they've done is they put it into testing, they've done research on the people that they've tested it on, and then they have come back and they've said all of these impressive percentages about how much people love it. So, for example, 70% of Copilot users say they were more productive and say it improved the quality of their work and that it helped jumpstart the creative process. I think that's probably fair for pretty much any AI assistance tool I've used. I don't really, that doesn't wow me. Although I don't think you have Bard embedded within Google Docs yet. So there's still definitely a race to be first for these things. And I think Microsoft are definitely trying to take market share wherever they can. They didn't successfully take market share from Google with Bing Chat. They claim that they did. All the analysts say that they actually didn't. So it'll be interesting to see what happened there. I'm sure a lot of people downloaded the Edge browser so they could use Bing Chat, but I haven't continued to use it. Users caught up on a missed meeting nearly 4 times faster. That sounds like a really weird stat to be proud of. Does anyone measure how long it takes?
Is that some kind of summarization? That, like, what is the how did they catch up on meetings?
Yes, agreed. It's a very strange stat to put in this sort of like all Microsoft press release. I guess 4 times faster sounded impressive, but catch up on meetings, does that mean Teams recordings that have transcriptions and automatic chapters? Because Zoom does that very well, for example. Does it mean automatic meeting summaries that are then just shared in Teams? I think a lot of the meeting summaries look good, but they're actually pretty crap still. I know Rafie tried to use one for pretty much every meeting that he had in the day, and he gave up on pretty much every tool that he used because they just weren't doing the job that I guess his own note-taking was doing for him. So you can catch up on meetings nearly 4 times faster, but you're probably losing half of the context, would be my guess. They just didn't put that in the press release. Was there anything you sort of liked about these? I mean, I think the one that definitely sounds right to me is basically 9 out of every 10 people who used Copilot said it makes it easier to get started on a first draft. We've heard that loads from our own user research as well. Like, you can now draft a template from scratch with Genie, and lawyers love it, businesses love it, because you go from having nothing to having a starting point from which you can edit and tailor and customize and all of those things. So I think that's probably AI's strongest point from the year past.
Yeah, I agree. Probably a lot of people use ChatGPT for this kind of thing as well, right? Just to help them jumpstart the drafting of an email, a document, or whatever. I guess this is one of the big use cases, and the other is just asking questions and getting wrong answers in a confident manner. One thing that I did like, although I'm a bit confused by it as well, is the Copilot Studio, which is very similar to the OpenAI GPTs, right? The reason why I'm confused is because Microsoft Copilot uses GPT-4, and it feels like this is almost exactly the same product as the one that OpenAI released, right? So the GPT-4, the GPT-S, and Copilot Studio. It allows people to just make their own assistants, right?
Yeah, it does. It does sound exactly like that. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, Microsoft done their own user research, and they want people to be able to do these things within the Microsoft ecosystem. And just because Microsoft wanted to do it, there's no way Sam Altman's going to be like, oh, okay, you're doing that, so we won't do that. I think they're probably both thinking that the more we can get people building GPTs with Microsoft or with OpenAI, the more we can share data, and create the GPT store that becomes the de facto place you go for an AI agent service or product or app or whatever off the shelf useful bot. I don't see them. I wonder if they'll be able to hold on to the market lead here.
Yeah, that's a big question, right? And thinking about it, Microsoft doing this feels more natural than OpenAI doing this, just because Microsoft already has the ecosystem, right? So they can build on it, they have the users, they can capitalize on it essentially. But OpenAI is trying to, from a large language model API provider, become a AI ecosystem provider in a way. Maybe they can pull it off, but it's a tough job.
I wonder if they can. I think with Microsoft you have this enterprise feel, but they have struggled historically to win around developers to their ecosystems. They've never been able to get close to anything like the App Store or Google Play Store or anything like that, right? They just don't own the infrastructure in the way that those app stores that have been really successful do. Whereas OpenAI do own the infrastructure. And I think that does give them a leg up. Also, I think developers probably like OpenAI as a company more than Microsoft, because I think a lot of people still associate Microsoft with things like .NET products and horrible languages and things that are just hard to work with and clunky, which I guess just comes from being a legacy company fighting to not be the next IBM that just sort of becomes a big, slow-moving freight train of a company. I am very interested to see what happens with these. It does feel like they have made it very easy to create GPTs or to create your own Copilot, I suppose is Microsoft's wording. But should anyone be able to create something and not code it? It feels like you can do something useful. I don't know if you'll be able to do something that's so massively useful that it's a game changer for the industry. I mean, Character AI basically innovated this model, right? They raised millions just off the idea that anyone could create any particular character. They were the front runner with that sort of strategy. And then Facebook recently announced their AI characters that you can interact with. So basically trying to steal that, but they're also doing clever things with audience share. So you have like Snoop Dogg, who is one of their characters, for example. So you can just have a chat with Snoop Dogg. I think that's clever. I think that might catch on. But this feels like it's an architectural, like a platform level thing that they're trying to do. But I don't know why you wouldn't just build it yourself or like save it as a preset.
That is a great point.
Where's the market? How am I selling it, right? And if someone can sell it right now, I think I could probably just create what they're selling myself quite quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And if a company has the resources to do the market research, the user research to come up with an idea for a Copilot that's wildly successful, then surely they would also have the resources to just code it instead of build it using Copilot, right?
That's it. Like no GPT is defensible yet as a standalone product. And an app has so much wrapped around it in terms of like the onboarding, the activation, the usage, the way that you bring your friends in to use it. And it's just, maybe I'm seeing this from a very surface level and it's going to be massive. And it may well be, but I just don't think it will be with shove loads of text in there, give it a name and get people using it. It feels like that's not enough because people have been using ChatGPT for a year now almost, and it's harder to wow us now than it was before.
Let's see. I'm very curious though to see what use cases people will come up with, and when it's a thing, what the marketplace will look like and what will be the killer apps in that marketplace. Maybe nothing, right? Because OpenAI already had a marketplace. I I've used it a tiny bit. I don't know if there's any killer apps in there that people are actually using.
Yeah, usage data will actually, it may completely change my view on this. I will be keeping an eye out for that for sure, and I'm sure we'll discuss it here. Now, I noticed that there was something that you've added here, which is Notion's most recent release. I wondered if you wanted to talk about that at all.
Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, they've released this Notion QA, which is a way to search using language model across your entire Notion database. And that I feel is something that's very similar to Copilot that we were mentioning before. So just shove a bunch of documents in there and ask questions of them, but also something generally useful with an application like Notion, where most organizations or individuals have a lot of different data in there. And one of the hardest things to do is to search and index them. And if you can get reliable answers across that data, that could be very useful. I'm looking forward to playing with that, although we don't have access yet, so I haven't been able to test it out, but I'm fully planning to test it out when access does roll out.
Do we know what Notion use? Do they have their
I
own
do not.
in-house models?
I'm not sure, actually.
The reason I ask is that if it is GPT-4, first off, I don't think 100,000 tokens is going to cut it for our Notion, for example.
So correct, yeah, but I'm pretty sure that they don't shove everything in there. That would be very, very expensive as well. So they do what pretty much everyone else does, which is do an information extraction step first. So information retrieval, and then use that as the input and the context to the language model. So when a user has a query, so when we write something in Notion, they'll go and somehow retrieve the most relevant bits of Notion content, and then use that to provide an answer. And then the problem with that is that the results that you get don't just depend on how good your language model is, but also on how good your information retrieval mechanism is. So it will be a test of that as well.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting to see. I think the larger the inputs, the more likely, I think, I'm generalizing over a year's worth of research here, but I'm specifically thinking of someone who spent the time. I think they had early access to GPT-4 Turbo versus GPT-4, and they were talking about retrieval over a large data set. I don't have the link on me, I'm afraid, but I'm sure it's Googleable. And what they found was that GPT-4 was actually better at retrieving accurate information from a large data set, but GPT-4 Turbo was fairly biased towards the first and the last bit of the data that you put in, which I think you and Rafie have touched on before about why that happens. But I wondered if you thought maybe that sort of thing would be fixed by now, or maybe it'll only be fixed with GPT-5 or different foundation model models.
I was also hoping that this could be fixed with OpenAI releasing the big context size model, but apparently it's not. I was thinking that because there's a lot of different implementations and ways to get large context sizes, and I was hoping that OpenAI was waiting for a breakthrough before releasing their own. But apparently their own also has the same kind of problems that previous large context size models had.
From a little bit of research, by the way, it does look like Notion uses OpenAI. So
okay, good to know.
That would make sense. So once we get testing that, let's see if we find the same thing as well. Although we won't know what the start and the end of what it retrieves is, right? Which is what you were just referring to, the different sort of elements
we won't know
how it retrieves and filters.
And this limitation that we just talked about applies to when you just shove everything in the language model context, but it does not apply to the information retrieval step before that, right? So if they do, and they will be doing an information retrieval step, then that's independent of this large context size mechanism that we're talking about. So maybe it will not have these kinds of limitations. It will have other limitations that are dependent on the information retrieval step, but the information retrieval is not happening using a language model.
Got it. makes sense. Well, that gives me hope, and I'm actually weirdly excited about this. I think when you just start up as a company, Notion is just perfect. It's such a nice tool to use. But I mean, we're not huge. We have a lot of documentation, and Notion has become very bloated, very slow, and maybe this will help with that. But if it suffers from the same sort of bloated slowness, then I'm just going to be upset with Notion even more. I'm looking
I
forward to
agree.
trying it
There's
out.
too many features in there now, and it feels like a slow interface rather than a zoom fast interface.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
disappointing.
agreed. I should probably look at their product roadmap and see what it is that they're prioritizing before I start moaning about the fact that I can't search for the document that I want and get it instantly. Yeah, who organizes things by files anymore, right? All you want to do is search. The file hierarchies are not going to be something that we even think about, unless you're like a data scientist, or data center specialist as well, perhaps. So I think let's probably wrap it up there. I think we'll pop links in the show notes to TechCrunch roundup of Microsoft's Ignite event. The official Microsoft release, apparently, they released over 100 pieces of news around AI releases. So absolutely massive effort on their part to try and get AI in the hands of everybody, which I think is a good thing, to be honest. If Microsoft pushing AI this hard achieves one thing, and I could hope for one thing, then it would be that we don't have to rely on Gen Z to pick up AI tools, and actually we'll get the millennials, we'll get Gen X happily picking up and paying for AI SaaS tools to help them with their sort of workflows. And that's not just selfishly because then people might, pay for Genie, but also it's just going to be a lot of fun to work in this industry if, everyone's getting as on board with this as our parents eventually got on board with Facebook, for example, and still use 3 billion people still using Facebook. Blows my mind. I don't think I've been on it for years. Any closing thoughts, Alex?
Not really. Just that I've actually I'm one of the few people that have never been on Facebook. Maybe I'll be one of the few people that has never been on Copilot either. Although too late for that. I've used GitHub Copilot.
One thing we haven't mentioned is that Microsoft is, by doing this, potentially harming a lot of companies that have built Microsoft Word extensions. Because if you can now use a GPT within Microsoft Word, or it'll be, SharePoint and, all the sort of cloud 365 stuff, you're less likely to need a tool that does something that you currently pay for, because if the cost to build a functioning GPT is a race to the bottom, then you're going to end up with whatever add-ons or integrations for your Microsoft Word documents and Excel that you could possibly want. And to be honest, that is a viable market, right? Like, I've paid for Google Apps add-ons, I've paid for Microsoft Word add-ons. So there is a market there. But it'll be strange because Microsoft is really heating up what those companies have to compete with. And it's always the risk of building an add-on to a tool rather than building your own sort of infrastructure from the ground up. But hopefully they've made their money while they can, because it may be hard to make that money in the coming years.
That's it. There's a lot of things for which language models are not very good, right? Or at least not cost efficient and can be done a lot quicker, maybe in a better way using other mechanisms. So maybe those are still okay.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. Good old actual coding and stuff like that. Is that a thing anymore? Or does everyone just use a language model? Find out in our next episode, where Alex and I will be talking about my adventures with Alex supervising as I try and write my own code with AI. But until then, lovely to chat, Alex, and goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.